Hey guys, Jake Brown here for RotoCurve, and today we're going to take a look at some of the underpriced plays on some of the second-tier sites in the industry for Week 2 of NFL. Give me one moment. Let me share my screen with you. All right, and the first site we're going to look at is Fantasy Aces. And on the right, spoiler alert, you see the players I've selected, and I just wanted to kind of run through with you in this segment. Like I said last week, it's not necessarily the value plays that you should be including in all of your lineups, but these are plays that on these sites in particular, these players are well underpriced compared to the scoring formats and other sites pricing on them. So first we'll look at Justin Forsett, who may be in line for one of the biggest weeks of any running back this week. He's slotted in at 4,700. Like I mentioned in the previous video, pricing's a bit stratified, as you'll see. $100 between backs, sometimes $50 between backs. You'll also notice where Justin Forsett falls in. He falls into a nice range, which includes Mark Ingram and Carlos Hyde, who are also good plays. And they're also listed below guys like Alfred Morris and Rashad Jennings and Lamar Miller, who the second two, Jennings and Miller, have some upside, but certainly not more upside or more floor than a guy like Forsett and possibly Ingram as well. So I really like the way Justin Forsett is priced on this site and his relation to some other guys, specifically the $300 bump from Lamar Miller to LaShawn McCoy right here, and that additional $300 bump. That just doesn't happen that often on Fantasy Aces to see two players and it affected by $650. So guys below this line are a considerable value who you view as similar to anyone, and I don't necessarily view them as similar to Jeremy Hill or Marshawn Lynch. But the way Fantasy Aces works with the stratified pricing, I think that this is just a range that Justin Forsett and to a lesser degree Mark Ingram shouldn't really be in. And the same goes for Jordan Matthews. When you switch over to wide receivers, priced around 4,700, you'll see he's just in a price range, that he doesn't belong in. I mean, Brandon Marshall, Devontae Adams, Jarvis Landry's more expensive on a non-PPR site. Same with Brandon Cook. So Jordan Matthews relative to the field just isn't where he should be. So I would certainly own Jordan Matthews. And the last pick I included on this site would be one, the only tight end that could have burned you last week, Greg Olsen, just because of where he is on the salary scale on the left. You've got him priced at like the 13th tight end on this list. And he just has way too much talent for that and should be more of a focus. So again, while it's not someone I will definitely play, just a four-way tie, it looks like, to be the 10th price tight end. So there's 13, theoretically 12 guys at his level or better. And I just think he's too talented for that. Looking at quarterback on this site, one thing I wanted to point out, again, it's kind of looking and you see how stratified and close, 100, 100, 200, 200, 200, 300. So just look in and notice those bumps. Notice that Aaron Rodgers on this site, that's a significant jump compared to the number two. So if you're not really if you are feeling Aaron Rodgers, this is probably the site to avoid him. I know that isn't really what this segment is usually about, but just kind of looking at pricing, the way Fantasy Aces works, pretty much fading the top quarterbacks when they are in line with the others' pricing and there's a premium put on them. Switching over to Fantasy Draft. Whoop. All right, on Fantasy Draft, we have, and I have listed Carlos Hyde and Amir Abdullah for where they fit in the running back game. It's more with where a guy like Carlos Hyde, who I'm not huge on this week with his team traveling, West Coast to East Coast and Pittsburgh lying in wait for 10 days waiting to avenge their opener. So I'm not a huge Carlos Hyde guy this week, despite some of those percentage ownerships from Thursday night. But he's priced in with Bishop Sankey, with Alfred Blue, below Chris Johnson. So where he fits in on Fantasy Draft pricing, I like him. And I like that Abdullah happens to be significantly lower. I mean, we're going through a large chunk of guys to go from Carlos Hyde to Abdullah, which isn't really the case on many of these other sites. So he fits in, between Benny Cunningham and Joyke Bell and just above Tevin Coleman. And the scary part of Abdullah is, 11 touches. Don't know how many times he's going to touch the ball. But when he does, he should be fairly explosive. The wide receiver I like to mention on Fantasy Draft on the right side is Brandon Cooks. He's actually pretty close to where he should be in terms of ranking, in terms of where he slots in, third, or I don't know the number, sorry for that, but if he's 15th or 20th ranked wide receiver. But one thing I noticed again is there's a significant drop down from Jordan Matthews, the receiver priced right above Brandon Cooks, to Brandon Cooks. You'll also notice that Fantasy Draft is the one site we're talking about today that is full PPR. And Brandon Cooks being someone that should demand more targets this week and in the future than he did last week. To be that much, and Julian Edelman's another one who I would consider. I'll throw him on the right just because you have PPR guys who are significantly lower priced with that drop off. The drop off from them down to a guy like Brandon Marshall or a Golden Tate is the same as the jump up to Jordan Matthews, TY. And I think they're pretty much on par with Jordan Matthews in full PPR. Matthews is a target machine, and so are the two of them. So that difference in pricing between them and Jordan Matthews makes them more valuable on Fantasy Draft, in my opinion. The tight end I have included is Jason Witten on Fantasy Draft, where he comes in at his probably best value on any of the sites. You can throw out Gronk for this comparison just because he's always going to be priced up like a mid to upper tier receiver, and deservedly so. But Witten actually comes in behind Safarian Jenkins and Martellus Bennett. So, at less than Jenkins, I'm actually toying on FanDuel with the idea of dropping from Witten to Jenkins, where Jenkins has his softest cap price in the industry at minimum price. But where he's at the same price as someone like Kyle Rudolph, which feels like, kind of a gamble and cheaper than Safarian Jenkins, this is where I'm going to play Jason Witten. I may also play him elsewhere, but at tight end, he's going to be included in the majority of my rosters on Fantasy Draft. And finally, we'll move over to Stars Draft. And like last week with Kirk Cousins, I have Nick Foles listed here as one of the cheapest quarterbacks available. I believe you can slot down and actually take Blake Bortles, Winston, maybe Manziel on here somewhere. No, Manziel's more. So the previous two for less, but he comes in right near the bottom of quarterbacks. Not a position I think you should be paying up for many weeks the way fantasy scoring works. And with his relation in cap price to some of these other guys where quarterbacks do get, you have 4 quarterbacks above 8,000, which is significant, and a bunch in the high 7s. So that 5,400 tag just opens things up for you. So if you're having positive feelings about Nick Foles this week, the place to play him is most definitely Stars Draft. Moving to running back, having Mark Ingram here. Mark Ingram comes in kind of between Forsett and Hyde. And that's right around where he came in, I believe, on Fantasy Aces. But the other issue is that on Stars Draft, you have Joseph Randall at 7,000. You have Lamar Miller at 500 more than Mark Ingram in the same price as Eddie Lacy. You have Abdullah in line for pricing, more expensive than Ivory, and with Carlos Hyde. And those are guys, Randall, Miller, and Abdullah, who I think, regardless of how you feel about them, you'd have to agree are pretty poor pricing plays for this site when compared to Ingram. So that's why I really like Ingram. I'll also be working in Forsett on here for only 200 more. And while I've mentioned Jordan Matthews on every site, this is where you absolutely have to play him. I said the same last week with Keenan Allen, who was 4,900 on Stars Draft. It just seems like he's mispriced. He's below Jarvis Landry. He's at the same price as John Brown, below Terrence Williams. Not getting enough respect. I said it last week, and despite the unfortunate call and the unfortunate drop, I'll still stick with it again. This is going to be the best receiver in Eagles history. At this price, you simply can't ignore him here. And while last week I may have gotten the defense a little bit wrong, and I apologize, with the Buccaneers and Titans game, I was feeling a pick 6 guarantee, which a friend of mine told me was insane. Sure enough, it happened. I just had 75% exposure to the Bucs and 25% to the Titans, so I got it wrong. This is, what I did in cash games last week, and like you should in most weeks, is just pay up for one of the 5 best defenses. This week, on most charts I've seen, those best defenses are the Rams, the Ravens, the Panthers, or the Dolphins. And on most sites, they're priced 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, somewhere in that top 5, those 4 teams. This would be a site where the Dolphins come in a little bit cheaper. They come in tied for 7th price with the Cardinals and actually allow you a little bit of cap relief when compared to teams like the Rams, Ravens, and Panthers. So Stars Draft, while I try to mix up defensive exposure across sites a little bit, I try to stay into a core of, 2 to 3 defenses. If I didn't have the Dolphins on another site, I would still probably play them here and open it up to a 4th defense because of their price. And that's going to do it for this comparison. I will be posting in the forums tomorrow on DraftPod. I just wanted to give you guys a chance to look it over. So, yeah, end that real quickly. So, yeah, best of luck. And as usual, keep them sharp.